Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our July 12th, 2024 Board of Douglas County Commissioners budget deliberation, first day of budget deliberations. We've had 3 days of hearings, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then we had Thursday off to do some homework and bring it back for an opportunity to kind of talk through what we as a commission have for our values around this budget. Actually, Sarah is going to answer some questions that we left her with on Wednesday, and we will start there, I believe.
Yeah, actually, I think Cammie's going to pull up that, or you want to just, how do we want to do this? Do you want to show it, Jake? Do you want to get into the panel and show what you have before we email it? And then Cammie, do you want to just read through the questions that we followed up on? Jake, do you want me to send you the link? You got it? All right. We've been working to pull together some of the various follow-up information that commissioners asked for. After this, we will get you, I think we have some print copies even too, right? So maybe we want to distribute that and then we can send it to you electronically as well.
You'll need to get closer to that mic, Sarah, when you're ready.
Normally that's never a problem. Right. All right, you got it. Cammie, Jake, are you about, you want me to put you in the panel? All right, let me get Jake in the panel. Oh, I'm not a co-host today. Hey, Robin, can you move Jake into the panel? Oh, she made me
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
And you should have been made a co-host.
That's all right. All right, Jake's in the panel. All right. Where do you want to start, Cammie?
Do you want me just to list off?
Yep. Yep. Oh, that's small, Jake. Yeah, there you go. And Cammie knows that I always chime in. We've contacted the city of Lawrence about alternative budget scenarios for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical related to 4 staff on an apparatus versus 3. We have a call later today with finance staff to try to get a better sense of that and what its impact would be on county budget. And commissioners, I'm just not confident that we will be able to get that figured out by the time you want to set your public hearing. But we will do our best to bring it back to you as quickly as we can. We do have some additional information, and I'll let you guys talk through this because you have a better sense of what this is. Yeah.
Good morning. So we gathered some follow-up questions, and I can just give you the list of what all is in that packet. A couple of the documents included are a little bit large, so it is about 40 pages. There's the LDCFM follow-up numbers that Sarah just spoke about, that we have a meeting later today to talk to them about and get some more clarity on that, but this information is updated and brand new for you. There's also behavioral health general fund items that you asked about, the number of behavioral health, Jake's getting there, behavioral health items that could be moved from mill levy to, there it is, that could be moved from mill levy to mental health sales tax fund. And those are listed there for you. And then we've got some appraiser follow-up on the question.
Maybe go back to.
Did you want to stop on that?
Yeah. So the reason why we have them kind of in 2 categories is the first box was what staff was thinking about as we were moving into the proposed budget. 3 of those are in the criminal justice services budget. 4 of them are, as we have it lined out, And then the last one for the Director of Behavioral Health Projects, that is the salary amount. We could also move benefits if we need to. And then the bottom two, I mean, I just want to be really clear. We've not spoken to Bert Nash, the sheriff, Heartland Rate Act about these things. So that's why I wanted to list them as potential and possible. And I'd want to do some more thorough checking to validate that they are. I mean, I know inmates are, I know these two are, so that's why we didn't go any further than that, are eligible for the behavioral health sales tax.
So let me ask you on that, the Heartland Rate Act MAT line, that's not quite the same as the supplemental request we have for 172,497.
No, so these would be the existing positions. Yeah, I wouldn't, these are the existing, I'm going to get it wrong, intensive care coordination or intensive care, I think it's the intensive care coordination team. And so I wouldn't have, I mean, that's what they are. So but they do MAT and addiction counseling services as a part of that. So that's why.
Because
Or is this the one? Is this the one that's?
it's just MAT and addiction services.
But is this the one that's assigned to? Oh, it's assigned to the jail.
Yes.
Oh, okay, so this is the jail contract. So it is currently not represented under your community partners, and it's represented in the sheriff's budget.
got it, thank you.
And then the Bert Nash one is for their behavioral health forensic services in the jail.
So
That's what that. Yep. Okay.
I don't want to trip us up anymore, but I just want to make sure I'm tracking right. Both those potential expenses, the Burt Nash and Heartland Rate Act, are part of the sheriff's budget because they're contracts directly with the sheriff's department.
Yes, for services at the jail.
Okay, thank you.
And when you're looking in your budget for them, we've given you the budget line item numbers off to the right, so that you can identify those.
In terms of if we look for this, if we look to make this change, does it complicate things in terms of the management of any of those line items to have them under the mental health sales tax as opposed to where they currently live in the sheriff's budget?
I mean, I think from an administration standpoint, we can make it work. I'd want to have more conversations with the sheriff's office so that they feel like they have the ability to manage that contract from a day-to-day basis, and we would just simply change the accounting on how the bill's paid.
Okay. And as we have these discussions, we have today on a Friday, then we have the weekend, and then Monday and Tuesday is what we have scheduled for deliberations. Is it possible to get some of those discussions, even over the weekend or over the afternoons when we're off? Will we be able to get some of those discussions done in order to make a decision by Wednesday?
I think yes, but I would love a little more direction from the commission as to how, if that's what you want to have included,
Sure.
so that I'm not just, never mind, we decided not to do it.
I'm just looking at
Timing.
what the timing of
Right.
things, yeah.
Yeah, I think we could probably get a hold of someone in the sheriff's office and talk about that in advance of Wednesday.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so the next piece of information in your packet is the appraiser's information on assessed value questions. So there is a follow-up email on that. Then there's Heartland Community Health Center had a question. They were supposed to give us the FTE count, so that information is there. The next one should be Heartland Rate Act's follow-up information, the questions that were asked of them. And so they put some information on their COLA request in there.
Hold up, do we,
It's not?
No, I think the next thing is the affordable housing for 9th Street Missionary Baptist is what's in our
Oh,
packet.
so maybe Heartland's came in, okay, Heartland it came in a little late before printing.
all right. so yeah,
You'll
we don't
get
have
it
that
in
yet.
your electronic PDF though, because it's all being captured as it came in. So sorry about that. And then, so 9th Street Missionary Baptist Church should be your next one. And that was their follow-up information. These would be some attachments for, yeah, they have a whole packet that they've added. Okay. Yeah, this is the pretty big part. Trinity and Home Care should be our next one with that spreadsheet correction. There was just some misunderstandings on how to fill out the form, so there should be, and I believe you guys additionally got an email on that.
We don't have that one either.
It just came in, so
It
we'll
just
get it in
came
your
in late.
electronic packet.
So it just came in this morning to us. If you got it earlier, we didn't get it. How about Housing Authority?
Yes.
Lawrence Housing Authority is my next one, so they gave some information on, it was requested about their New Horizons and landlord engagement. The next one should be the maintenance department follow-up. Gone through a lot of documents here. Oh, yes, this was the maintenance and sustainability answer on the utilities. And the electricity word in red is inadvertent, and we can't get that removed, so just, there's no intention in that. The next one should be Eudora Chambers' response about their city information, and she clarified that she misunderstood, and you have the email with her answers on that. Then we should have the percentages of change. I kind of wanted to explain this just for a hot second because this was requested by one commissioner. This is just the percentage and change from the 2024 estimate to the 2025 budget. And it is only operational departments because it was just thrown together at the request. So if you want the spreadsheet that does this, I can give it to you, but this is the printout from that.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to talk a little bit about using 24 reestimate as opposed to 24 budget. I think commissioners are aware of this, but for others. So the 24 reestimate is work that we've done in the last few months inside the current year based off of, expenses to date inside 2024 and what we estimate for the rest of the year. This budget is not official yet. We don't really use this budget. It doesn't become official until we amend. And that, we don't do that till December. And even then, we don't really amend on the line item. So these are estimates. I prefer to work sometimes budget to budget, which would be the 24 budget to the 25 budget. So we've had situations where departments have not met their budget estimate. And so I want to make sure we're honoring that we're trying to get the best numbers we have, but if we need a little more or it indefinitely, it could still be less than this in some cases. So, and then we've marked there where we have put some things that sort of skew those results.
And I do believe that's the end of our documentation that we've received. We have a couple of partners that we have asked for some follow-up, and we are still waiting for their response. They've indicated they'd get it to us as soon as possible.
Do you all have other things that you're specifically waiting, and we'll be tracking this throughout this conversation, but if there are specific things you want to have for Monday or for Tuesday, please let us know.
We'll probably have some direction by the end of today if we have other things we're looking for.
So what might be helpful next is if commissioners, want to talk through some of the thoughts they might have about how to approach deliberations as you were thinking about your individual priorities as we move through. And we also have the budget option sheet that we could put up on the screen, which shows all the supplemental requests, and we could kind of talk through some of those first, but really turn this over to you all.
I'd say we could either start with the supplemental requests, or we could start with, and we have some additional information here which complicates things in terms of having a chance to kind of process it and look through. But I know one of my reads through the budget was to see what other places can we find some efficiencies, and I have a few of those that I've flagged, if we want to start with those. And I don't know if other commissioners have been looking at, outside of the options necessarily, the supplemental requests, other things that might happen within the budget for some cost savings.
Let me say something about that, because I think, so one of the things that I do is I look at some of the changes between years, right? What we funded, where we funded certain departments. And if we just stay with Douglas County departments and don't worry about community partners for start, one of the exercises that I did in doing that is looking at not just department by department, because some department budgets are rather tiny and some are rather large. Some have embedded in them things that we've asked for. And so really when I took every one of those departments and put them all together, the increase was actually below the total amount of assessed valuation increase that we've seen. Given if I take out the compensation study, if we include that compensation study, it throws sort of everything out of whack. And yet, I think that compensation study doesn't just affect administration, though it's on the administration line, it affects everything else. And I also think that that is money that we are wanting to make sure stays in the budget to address and make sure that we still have competitive salaries. I want to be really cautious about going into each department's budget, especially for those who are elected officials, and determine what efficiencies need to be made there. I think if we want to say, look, your percentage is high, so if you, and I'm just throwing a ballpark number out, if we're seeing an increase in a department's budget by maybe 30%, I think we can say, we'd like to see you reduce costs at about 10%, or that's just, I'm just throwing out random numbers here. But I really don't want to get into the habit of the commission micromanaging departments across the county, I think. And I don't think we actually have the authority to do that for those elected positions. So those are just my thinking on it. It's a good exercise for me, but in the end, when I actually worked all the way down through those numbers, I didn't see significant increases. We have some departments that have cut way back, and then we have other departments who have increased, and sometimes their increases are outside of things they have control of, just depending on what they do. For example, Douglas County elections, we keep getting more and more expectations from the state of Kansas that are not funded. But in some way, counties have to come up with the dollars for it, and we can't tell. I don't believe we can tell our county clerk that you don't have to do those. Those are state laws that they have to do. So those are just some of my thoughts. I don't know where you were going with that, Commissioner Willie, but that's some of my thoughts right off the bat.
I had a different tactic a little bit, in part because I knew that you were spending some time digging into that, and also that we were going to get a little bit of data back from staff on it. I looked at some other places in here, just a few that stood out to me for conversation. Some of them that I thought were more, one-time things that could come either things that could come from the mental health sales tax, or things that were, one-time that could come from fund balance. But there were a couple others. One was that transfer from Road and Bridge to CIP, which then I think should be able to free up an allocation that we would make from general to CIP, like offset that. So that was to the tune of $500,000. That was one place that I flagged as a possible. It then functions in this case as a one-time savings to mill levy, but in conversations with Sarah, I felt like that's something that we could probably be able to manage on an ongoing basis also. So I think it's still a good exercise for us to talk through it. Another one was, this was in the equipment reserves, which I'm a big fan of departments having an equipment reserve. I think it gives them the autonomy to manage things like, when they need a vehicle, they've planned for that and saved for that. But there was a couple that stood out, and one in part that I talked with Sarah about, and it was Economic Development Equipment Reserve. And I flagged that because those were words you don't see together all the time. And that seems to be kind of a relic of fund that was saved under previous commissioners that's not really been accessed. And that was $394,832 that I thought could also transfer either to CIP and offset that general fund allocation, or go directly to general fund. Sarah?
Can I give a little bit of explanation on those first two before we go on to the next?
Thank you.
Other commissioners and the public. So, and I when I think big picture about how Douglas County puts together its budget, and how we look at revenues, we have a long tradition of being conservative in our revenue estimates. I believe that is sound fiscal management on our part, that we don't, we are not in a position where we're under we've over budgeted and don't have enough revenues to do the things that we plan for in the budget. That means that on occasion, and then secondarily, our department heads and elected officials are really good about not doing a use it or lose it mentality. And part of that is a relationship between administration, the Board of County Commissioners, and those department heads, that they know that their budgets have flexibility for them to do what they need to do to align costs to the proper area for accounting purposes as to where the cost should be held. And they know that because most of them are in the general fund, that they've got flexibility in there, and they work closely with me. We are in constant conversation about how those things are going. But what that means is that we often end a fiscal year $1 million to $2 million to the good on expenses. And I'm going to refuse to think that that's a bad thing. Others might say it is, but in my world, it's not. So when you have those two factors, you're often going to have additional fund balance, reserves, or one-time resources. When I think about the county operating budget and where is the best place to apply those, the best place to apply one-time resources are for one-time expenses. And that would be our capital improvement program that is cash funded. If you go to a page of your budget book, and oh man, I didn't pull mine out. I think it's, yes, summaries page, not there yet, I'm not there yet. The CIP allocation line on the budget report, thanks Jill. I think it's like page 34. Something like that. Anyway, that $5 million on CIP projects transfer represents mill levy. That represents general fund resources. But, so there's ongoing mill levy that goes to support that pay-as-you-go cash financing program. If we were to offset some of that ongoing mill levy with one-time resources, as long as Chad Voigt and Brooke Sauer get the amount that they planned for in the CIP, I think we're fine. Now, if that entire amount was moved to just one-time resources, you'd begin to make me nervous that we were losing our commitment towards maintaining our infrastructure. But in a $5 million line item, $1 million or so, maybe a little more in certain years, is something that I think is possible in a way to maintain the mill levy expense. So that's the part of the conversation I had with Commissioner Willie, so that if we move that transfer from Road and Bridge, it wouldn't have to increase that transfer amount, it would offset that mill levy. Does that make sense, commissioners? Okay, then I'm gonna have Cammie share equipment reserve balances, because we haven't really talked about this much this year. As we did talk about, almost every department we have has at least one equipment reserve account to pay for equipment, vehicles. It can be used for software and computer equipment as well. There's a very specific state statute that allows us to make these transfers and maintain this, in essence, in private accounting, it's called depreciation accounts. In our world, it's called equipment reserve. It allows us to maintain those. We do budget for them. They're a part of your budget. You see them every year. They're on our website. But they're allowed to roll fund balances from year to year. So I'm going to have Cammie pull that up. The Economic Development Initiatives project was developed about 10 years ago. Commissioner Kelly, were you here then? I think it was before your time. And this was related to some of the funds that we had in our economic development initiatives. If we had direction from the commission at that time that if those funds were not spent in a given year, that they be transferred to this balance so that we could use them to pay for incentives for companies or economic development interests that came to mind. So I'm going to have you.
But has that been used?
Yes.
Oh, Cammie's not in the panel. Let me get you in the panel, Cammie. Go ahead, Patrick.
Sarah, I do think we have used that since my time on the commission. We have used some funds from that economic development fund. Can't remember all of a sudden, to provide incentives, so forth.
Yeah.
It has been used that way. I can't remember exactly, but I think 3 or 4 years ago we did use it as an incentive for an employer.
We did.
Yeah, and it feels like it had to do with the space out at Venture Park, the built space out there that we constructed it first and then looked for tenants for it. That
That
feels
sounds about
right.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know there are conversations at the EDC about something similar. I assume those are conversations with the city. Of course, in my time, which is very short here so far on the commission, the only incentives that we've been approached for at all have been through taxation, and we haven't been offsetting that with this. So it's just, I'm curious to know more.
Yeah, so I'm going to have Brooke see if she can find when the last time we had an expenditure out of this line item. It's about a third of the way down the page there. Yeah, economic development initiatives. So, yeah, I would need direction from the commission, if to spend out of this account anyway. This is not something that I spend out of or any member of county staff. And from what I understand, and we're checking with the auditors, it can be moved back to the general fund and reallocated for any purpose. So I would say if we wanted to use it to offset the mill levy in CIP, I'm just going to want to make sure I have clearance from auditors, but we've done something like this before. So as long as it goes back to the general fund, I think we're okay.
And as I read through this list, there were a couple that some that made perfect sense and some that I flagged for further conversation. And this was the only one that kind of rose as a possibility that was worth a larger discussion.
Yeah, we review this list, at least once a year internally, probably at least twice a year. And we've done some cleanup on these over the years and consolidated them. There's a story for every one of them.
And one of those stories that I decided, that I didn't think it was worth more discussion, but I'll let others decide too, was under heritage conservation, that line item, which isn't equipment necessarily, but that is those grants that were funded and that may outlive 1 year, and so not make sure that that funding is available because it was promised through the granting program. So it wasn't equipment necessarily, but it's a reserve that's valuable.
So the statute allows us that if a commission has made a direction for a particular project, we can do this transfer as long as it remains for that purpose. So because heritage conservation projects often are not completed inside one fiscal year, commissioners vote on that, and then we are able to move those funds, and then they can, based off of what they submitted when they submitted their grant application, then Caitlin Ammerline keeps track of what they're doing and pays those expenditures from that account.
Are there any others that are kind of worth a discussion? So like ECC radios, when we've had a recent request from them, I assumed those were coming out of our general fund, but they may also be coming out of here.
I'm not exactly sure where we're going to take that latest one, and some of that might be from the behavioral health sales tax because that's specifically for the mobile response team. But this is used to pay for equipment inside emergency communications center. And then the emergency telephone 911 is just a little bit of excess that we had at one point in time. And actually, I think we probably could put that back into the fund if we needed to.
So I'm looking at elections at 610, and I think my guess is, Jamie's not here, is that pays for ballot machines and things like, am I correct?
Yes, that is his reserve or depreciation account for the replacement of voting machines. And that is not all we will need when we replace that fleet. Yeah, last time we did it was, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, it was 1.3 million.
Commissioners, any other questions on equipment reserve?
I just want to clarify, Sarah, did I hear you say that you all are going to look up when the last time we did pull from that?
Brooke's gonna see if she
the
can-
economic development one? Okay.
Brooke's gonna see if she-
We flagged that last year too, and we were talking a lot about economic development last year and trying to determine what that was. So I appreciate you pulling it out again because it was very specific to some of our partners' requests last year. And then, but it wasn't a fully fleshed conversation. And I am curious, I'm interested to know how it's been useful before, but I have highlighted that now 2 years in a row as unsure if that money needs to sit there or if it could be used elsewhere.
So one thing I think that we could think about, lots of conversations at the EDC level about, we are running out of industrial land in our community. There have been a few sites that have been identified. Historically, like when we look at the history of Venture Park, the county played a role in purchasing that land and then having that land paid back by the businesses that were there once they were there. That's how East Hills, thank you. That's how I think we might use that fund in the future, and why I would be a little bit hesitant to absorb that into other budgets, because it does give us a specific line item in a specific area when that request comes, that we're ready to respond for it rather than being back on our heels. We do know that we need more land for, it helps us expand our tax base. Just a reminder to the public that's listening, we get double the taxes for industrial and commercial spaces. So I think it's a good investment to be thinking about what land is available for potential employers when they're thinking about Douglas County.
And I think those are valuable discussions and valuable discussions for the county to be involved in, especially based around tax base. I think we have full authority to work through our general fund or our fund balance for any of those. So I'm not saying that I don't think it rules out any of those discussions to have it unless you feel like that offers some kind of a safeguard, which it may. I look at something like the investment in Peaslee Tech and the building for Peaslee Tech as like, that was something that obviously we did not bring out of that line, and it's not specifically an incentive to a business, but it incentivizes much commercial activity to have that, and so that's come out of general fund in the past, and I have some one thought about Peaslee also, but anyway, I think that we might have some further discussion on that.
Commissioners, so looking back, it looks like the last time that fund was used to support a program was in 2019. There was a $10,000 appropriation made to the Baldwin City Chamber, and then there was a $45,000 appropriation made to the Jersey Street Apartments, the Baldwin Retirement Apartment Complex, and that was for an affordable housing grant.
And that was also 2019, both of those were?
Yes, yeah. There were some small expenditures in 2018, but that's all I saw.
So one of the things that we put into place last year, which also we'll need to talk about this year, because I think it came out of Commissioner's budget, was a matching for broadband applications, and it was $10,000 per application. It's not a lot. It didn't come out of this fund. I think it just came out of either the general fund or maybe it was flagged under our Commissioner's line item, but that's something we didn't talk about yet for this year that I definitely want to see us still support. But I just remembered that as we were talking about some of these smaller items.
We've been tracking that, Commissioners, to see how much we've actually paid on some of those grants, and it's been pretty small.
Oh, yeah. Since they only get it if they actually are successful. So it's probably been only 10,000. I think we've had one that's been successful so far.
And I want to say, like, I am not worried about the size of our general fund, the flexibility we have. If we have those kinds of expenses, we have the authority to make them.
This is Commissioner Reed. I just wanted to rewind a little bit to comments from fellow commissioners before and share that I tend to agree with you, Commissioner Kelly, that I think it's a really it's a delicate balance. I dig into those line items on internal departments, especially just because we have such a great amount of detail on those. to really try and at least figure out some of what the story is about the fluctuation of those budgets. And I think there's a lot of different factors depending on the size of the department, right, and the change in the work. But I really have a lot of confidence in our administration staff and departments that have been really mindful about those costs and slimming them where they can and where it makes sense in order to increase. And so I am nervous about us getting into a space of trying to be more directive about those specificities. I think that talking about broader things like our different funds and like the Road and Bridge Fund, that's a similar thought that I have about we talked about that a little bit yesterday with Public Works in order to help bring their fund balance to a better point to move some money from Road and Bridge to CIP. And I'm interested in if there's other places where that might make sense. And it's just a matter of the money's still available for what we need it for. It's just in a different spot. And how we talk, certainly I am interested in the conversation about all the one-time requests. Many of the one-time requests this year were specifically eligible for the mental health sales tax. And I think we've sort of talked about that throughout the days of our hearings and touched on that. So I expect that to be something that I'm eager to look back at that list of those potential projects and really talk about where we can shift the responsibility of those costs. And then the other one-time costs, I would like to flush out a conversation about is general fund a good place to pull for those from that have been included that may not have an ongoing mill impact. So I'm interested in those conversations and really want to focus on the options that we have in front of us. And that's kind of always the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the deliberations, I think, amongst us, is to really suss out if any of those options are high value enough to add in and figure out where we adjust accordingly. So Commissioner Riley, I really appreciate that you are thinking about efficiencies, and I am too. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at that conversation, and that it also maybe looks a little different from department to department, depending on the nature of the work they do, what sort of efficiencies are achievable. But I have a lot of confidence that that's the way that all of our department heads are thinking about their budgets, and appreciate Sarah's commentary earlier that the relationship between the county administrator's office and all those departments, including 4 of which are run by other electeds, is one that is an open line of communication and doesn't institute a culture or promote a culture of use it or lose it. And so we're still being really smart with being able to sometimes transfer those year-end balances and have them available for different allocation. So those are some of the thoughts I had. I think that, and then the other sort of more, I guess, global conversation that I would like us to talk more about is those those agencies, a few of which we talked about along the way in recent days, that have that are funded predominantly or more than 50% by the county. And what does that mean? What are there potentially efficiencies or opportunities for us to consider with those agencies, like the Senior Resource Center, Kansas Holistic Defenders? We talked a little bit about those 2 agencies earlier in the week. So those are some of the big topics on my mind coming into this morning.
Thanks for that, Commissioner Reed. I agree on those, and I would just add one more thing that I think we should talk about before we start breaking down spreadsheets and looking at options. And that's sort of all these COLA requests. I think we owe it to our community partners to have a very public discussion, and hopefully they're listening, because we got more COLA requests this year than I think in my time. When I started on the commission, we never got a COLA request from a community partner, and now each year we seem to get a few more. And in my mind, when I went through those, I looked at like what percentage of your budget is county funded, because it does make sense to me if they are significantly funded by the county and they don't take a lot of other options, then at some point we do have to recognize that in order for them to continue to operate the services that we've deemed as being important, we're going to have to look at COLA, making that commitment to COLA increases. But then I think there is also a threshold point when they become a county agency, because I am struggling with some of the requests that were in excess of 3.7, which is what we're looking at for market, and having those individual agencies determine it's much higher than that, or through other pressures are changing their numbers and coming to us. So I think that's the conversation we have. When do we say, look, we fund you at such a level that we need to start thinking about you becoming a county agency? And in some cases, and I'm thinking specifically about Douglas County Extension, is that the right, what are the pluses and minuses? When you see my budget, I've tucked some money into our commissioner budget, and I really didn't want to do this, but I can't figure out another way to do it, to just sort of hold it to have those conversations, and then we can allocate it at a later time. So I appreciate that, and I think we need to talk about COLAs. That's a really too long way of saying that, yes.
No, I appreciate that because it's on my notes, but I have too many notes and totally missed that. And on my sheet, I sort of highlighted all the boxes of the COLA request because it's just a big question mark overall. Those COLA requests were a little, well, they're all over the map because we have agencies that have totally different organizational structures, funding amounts, all of those factors that make it complicated to figure out what is a fair and equitable way for us to consider the county's responsibility in COLA increases. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely over a dozen. I had the count, but I forgot it off the top of my head. So it does feel like a bigger conversation to figure out, in particular, how we talk about that to community partners moving forward in future budget years, and how, figuring out what this commission thinks is, if there is an appropriate way to define, the types of positions or services that we fund that might be eligible for COLA, right? Or is it based on that threshold of how much you're funded by the county versus are the positions 100% serving Douglas County versus a larger region, or doing other services that are not related to what the county's paying for. All those things make the math really hard to figure out. But yeah, you're right, Commissioner Kelly, we've gotten such increased requests for that. It's clearly something that agencies are feeling across the board. And to your point earlier about the compensation study, I think that is really important for Douglas County, and it's an important way for us to lead by example as one of the biggest employers in the county, to reasonably and incrementally increase salaries so that we can retain talent. And that's something that I want to be able to help community partners figure out too. What does that look like, without it just being, if the county can help us close the gap this year, but then when will the gap widen again? How do we know where to assess who all's responsibility it is to fill those gaps for agencies doing work that's important to the county?
I really appreciate this conversation, commissioners. And, as you know, over the last 10 years, Douglas County has really changed its relationship to community partners from, good people, giving them money, just supportive without really any strings or obligations associated with those funds, to now where we have comprehensive service agreements for all of our community partners. We will in 2025 and 2026 for everyone over $75,000, to conversations around this. And I feel, I think I've shared with the commission, I feel a little guilty because I think as staff, I have a responsibility to bring you options and scenarios here. And this one's been a stumper for me because I wasn't sure how we wanted to think about how we evolve this relationship. And I actually think the discussion this year has been really helpful because I think it is two pieces. It's what type of organization is it to us? What is our relationship to it? And then if it is a closer relationship to us, how do we sort of figure out what a reasonable cost of living adjustment is? And then how do we finance that? And are we consistent? Because internally with departments, we're consistent. You know, the sheriff's cost of living adjustment is the same as maintenance. So we're consistent in that regard. What I think I've picked up this year from that conversation is this notion of agencies that have the majority of their funding is dependent upon Douglas County. And then if so, is there an evaluation that needs to take place about that agency becoming a county department? And as commissioners know, I've been really reluctant to start this conversation because oftentimes it's, you know, autonomy is important to some of these agencies, and it can be difficult in the community, and they have supporters that kind of like the way things are, so that change can be difficult. And I don't want the county to be seen as something that's, you know, that our goal here is control. As commissioners know, I worked in Johnson County for 11 years before I came here. Jill worked there as well, in the bastion of conservative Johnson County politics. Agencies such as Just Food, Cottonwood, Senior Resource Center, Burt Nash would have all been county employees making a living wage and getting capers. So it's my background that many of these agencies can be county departments, and they can be supported similar to how we support our departments. And they can still have robust friends organizations that do fundraising and community development and apply for grants. So you really can have both. So that's something that if you were to kind of identify some of those departments, I think we could explore that this fall. I'd like more time. Each one of those is going to be an individualized situation. You know, we started a little bit with the Senior Resource Center this year, but I think there's others that we could talk through, but every single one of them will have specificities that we need to discuss. And then I think we could come to a reasonable number of what that goal is. But then I think there are other agencies where we don't need that, where we are simply, we're buying a service from them. And if we think it's getting too expensive, we might realign that resource and cut back or reassign.
So I also had flagged COLA as something we would likely be talking about more, and some of these other pieces that are related, in addition to like what's the percentage of county funding as it shows up in our budget books, but also the health insurance that we pay for some of our partners and not others, and building space that we offset the cost for, provide for free. So there's some pieces where organizations that are, you know, very closely tied to Douglas County. I also always want to take a look at what's the opportunity cost, like what do they have of value for being independent nonprofits and such that would then go away, and maybe not all of those would be the case, but it would certainly be a change in a real alignment. And I can't stress enough getting good financials from organizations so that we can kind of identify, are they using the tools that they have at their disposal, or are they just coming to us because they were perceived to be easy? And I don't want that to be the case. And we have some that I think fall into that category that we can look through and say, yes, they're using their tools so well that they don't need us and don't need to ask for a request. Or others where, you know, there's a lot more legwork they could be doing rather than come to taxpayers for those. As far as that bigger discussion about who do we have conversations with or have some kind of exploration with about bringing them under the county umbrella, I think for me, those are few and far between. I think Senior Resources is currently the only one that I have an interest in kind of seeing where that might go. I know there may be others, and other commissioners may have interest in others, but I think I will be a little slower it was so far a little slower to come along with that conversation. I know we're a long ways out for any decisions on that, but there are also, you know, other tools like, you know, Peaslee Tech has been looking into how they can become their own taxing authority. I don't know where that process is. I didn't get a chance to ask, but the Extension Council is also one, like, I don't know that by state law they can become a county department. That would take some looking into also, and I think they have another government structure that has to be honored and such. So I don't, but they also have the ability to, maybe not on their own as a single county for a single county, but if they partner with another county, they can become a district and become their own taxing authority, and then their ability to go to the people for cost of living is, it's, then they have the tool to do that without coming through us. So those are other pieces or other sides of that discussion.
You want to go down any of those first, or do you want to go back and look at budget options and see which ones you had support for? What would make sense at this point?
In terms of COLA?
No, just in terms of taking the discussion further. Do you want to go down the COLA list or the department list?
In terms of departments, the only one, because knowing that we were going to get a little bit more information when we came here, the only one that I dug into at all, and was because we had some permission from the sheriff to look at this, was would he have the ability to self-fund a couple of the positions he was looking for? Because we had written in one, and he had flagged two others that were of high value to him. And then the question was, is there room within the budget that he's already allocated or as asked for that would cover one or two of those positions? So that's the only department budget. I'd kind of held a placeholder for further discussions, but that's the one that I had thought maybe if commissioners want to start with that conversation.
Well, and I would say, it's interesting that we had that conversation. The sheriff could do that. He doesn't necessarily need your approval or permission to do that. He would come to the commissioners and talk about his budget not going up, but he's going to change his FTE. So we could talk through that. But honestly, I don't think if that's the direction you want to go, you don't want to increase the mill levy or use other funds to pay for the new position. We don't have to solve that today, is all I want to say.
Yeah. But it comes down to, do we fund it out of our mill levy or do we not? Which is different from saying, you can't have it. And I think that's one of the things for the public to flag, how different a county budget is from a city budget in terms of the high level of collaboration that happens here. We have elected officials that are equally elected with the three of us, and we don't have specific authority over them, but this is this collaborative approach where people have agreed to work together through a budget process with respect. And same thing with community partners, that is a communication throughout the year also.
I think it's probably time to start looking at spreadsheets and looking at what options we have. I feel like we're there. What do other commissioners think?
Do you want to start with the budget options, or do we want to start with the conversation around some of the behavioral health, the possibilities of moving some things to behavioral health?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that maybe we start looking at the budget options sheet just as a preamble to the spreadsheet. I think it's a little bit more of a digestible list of the options and helps us zero in on that conversation if we go through line by line. I'm seeing affirmative head nods from other commissioners.
And we can track too if commissioners have indicated any support for any of these items. This is a reminder, this represents in columns H and I. H represents if it was included in the proposed budget. We are showing a mill levy impact, even if it is a one-time request. It would not have a mill levy impact, but that's just the way the formula works. And then the rating from staff.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out, Sarah, because I wanted to, I knew that, but I had to literally keep reminding myself of it and in those columns. So maybe it feels, because that first item is both one-time request and eligible for mental health sales tax. So we can indicate anything that says eligible for mental health sales tax will not have a mill levy impact. And and that's reflected like in our spreadsheet when we get to that part.
I want to be clear that if it is moved to the mental health sales tax, I will want clarification that you don't want mill levy, because there is mill levy that goes there now. So what you would be doing is transferring an expense from the general fund, moving it to the behavioral health fund, freeing up mill levy in the general fund, but then absorbing excess capacity in the behavioral health fund.
Yes.
So I'm just saying that the order of things that are listed on this list is not the same as the spreadsheet that we have for our homework or the budget options worksheet. So it may take a little bit to just make sure that we're comparing apples to apples.
And I want to have some clarity. So the first one up here that I want to talk through is the specialty court outcome evaluation. several commissioners indicated that they wanted to cut that. I may have read your spreadsheets wrong. That is already assigned to not come out of mill levy. It's already assigned to be one-time resources. So I had two commissioners sort of indicate that they.
So when I indicated that it wouldn't impact the mill levy.
Correct. So
That it would be a one-time expense coming out of, and that one could, I think that one could come out of mental health sales
Me
tax.
too.
That's where I had it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's how we have it in the proposed budget.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't clear to me that that was indicated as mental health sales tax, so I didn't want it to be a one-time cost on mill levy, even though it's minimal impact, but mental health sales tax made sense for that one.
And I designated some that were one times mental health sales tax versus, longer term obligations. So yeah, I had that from mental health sales tax.
The next one.
So to clarify for Sarah, it sounds like commissioners are supportive of that one-time specialty court evaluation, just clarifying.
But sort of ignore our mill levy total right now. We're just looking at individual items.
We did have a commissioner indicate support for the Human Services Program Support Specialist position.
That was me. I am supportive of it. I think that there's definitely a need, and like as a provider in the community who talks to a lot of other providers that work with HSC, I mean, the need for services from HSC continues to grow, and the administrative and financial work of that is pretty significant. And I think that given the amount of agencies that really work with, not just through HSC, there's other programs obviously in the Health and Human Services, but it's pretty big bandwidth suck from my experience in the community. So I'm supportive of increasing their capacity.
So I'm not against that as a thought process. My thought really was, I like how collaborative the HSC is with partners, and I think that it spreads the load somewhat there. That may be an inaccurate thought for it, but also that the largest need for HSC would be dollars to allocate in the community as opposed to putting those dollars into a staff position. So that was kind of my thought, that if we weren't talking about putting more dollars into the program, I didn't necessarily want to pay for another staff person with it.
And I visited with, this is in the administration section, and administration makes recommendations on this. So I visited with Sarah a little bit about this position because she did not recommend it. And Sarah, you feel okay talking a little bit about our conversation about it? You know, that there were some other spaces where we thought this might be, you thought this might be able to be, some of this work might be able to be covered.
Yeah, I think, early in the budget process, this is a request that you got last year. I think we've made it, make it work to get payments made. You're all right. Every one of you are correct in this situation. We do need more dollars to assist the community. We do need more help. And I think we're trying to find ways to do that. So my hope is that if the flexible supportive housing pool tool remains in the behavioral health budget, we may come back to you and out of those funds be able to support some additional support for the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, because that's going to be key to this work, is the work that Housing Stabilization Collaborative does. And that way I think we could feel, spend a little more time, make sure we feel justified that those are going for supportive housing, which are folks that are eligible for behavioral health and substance use disorder, and that we could feel good about that. So my hope is, and Jill and I have only had preliminary conversations about this, that perhaps we could come up with some support out of that supportive housing tool to support some assistance for the Housing Stabilization Collaborative. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And landlord incentives for Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority are also some things that we could talk through that. But particularly with the finance analyst that we're adding, the administration is supporting a lot of the processing of payments, and I think we can continue to do that in the future. This would be, to me, if we really expand and think about how that program grows.
I appreciate that explanation, Sarah. And I mean, part of why I'm supportive of it is because of that, the flexible supportive housing pool and a local voucher program is a significant increased need from that department or from that staff. And the recent, of course, I'm going to get all the words wrong because federal governments love too many words, but the big HUD grant, and and we are contracting for that with community partners, and there's still increased needs. So I just want to recognize that I really think we need to think about how to increase capacity there. It is also one that I wondered if it could be related to or pulled from or thought about in the mental health sales tax fund eventually because of that housing pool, the housing voucher program in particular, and that if it was more directly connected to that may be a good strategy. I just want to not lose, I suppose, a whole year of not thinking about how to increase capacity in that space. I'll just flag that.
And I had also hoped that the financial analyst, that position that is built in, we haven't talked about that one yet, might also backfill some of the need there in the short term.
Okay, moving down on this list, we had some support for the appraiser position. We had 2 commissioners program in 1 position for the appraiser.
I programmed in 1. I felt like the follow-up information from the appraiser and the conversation we had made it pretty evident that the workload has increased. It's definitely fluctuated over a 10-year span, but it seems like it's, our appraiser called it the new normal. And I think that increasing some capacity there makes sense, especially as our community is going to experience some more exponential growth in terms of, there's some recent annexations and new development and new parcels that will be added in sort of a significant wave. So I don't know that 2 seemed necessary, but 1 felt justifiable.
I was not one who built that in. I'm sensitive to that request, also always cautious about adding positions. To me, the biggest need that I heard and flagged was the upcoming retirements and needing to onboard someone kind of ahead of time. So I didn't really see that as adding an additional FTEs in the long run, but I saw it as maybe a need where that you talk about overhire to get that talent pool up so that we can manage that attrition when it comes. That to me felt like the first step, as opposed to adding positions, but I also didn't build any money in for that. I'm not sure what the process is.
Yeah, I was supportive of this based on the information provided. And, I think we could see down the line this contracting based on Brad's testimony to us. But I felt like it was definitely needed. I'm not supportive of 2. I was only supportive of 1. And I would also, I don't want to micromanage, but I am concerned about providing the cost for training, providing an incentive for the training, and I don't know that that's a great practice. I don't want to get into going line by line through that budget, but that's something I would like us to reconsider for the future.
I flagged that also and wasn't sure how far to dig in, but the only 2 departments that I saw that in, and there probably were others that I missed, was the appraiser and the sheriff's office. And the sheriff, he made comments about that's not, that they have filled most of those particular incentive roles. And it was drone pilots and kind of other specialty kinds of things. So they didn't really see using that. But I didn't know do other departments have that?
We have other departments that have some sort of incentive pay, but they're very different depending on the incentive. We've got some folks that pay an incentive if you're a Spanish speaker and you can do translation services. We've got Emergency Communications Center has some incentive pay as well. So I could have Michelle get us kind of a larger description of how we use incentive pay and bring that back at a later date. I don't think that it's necessarily tied to the budget decision.
Probably more be like a recommendation from staff about are there places where it's needed and are there places where maybe if they're also getting a pay increase because they've gained that skill, that's kind of redundant.
And I've flagged that. I don't think it's quite that way on the appraiser's office. They only have so many certain appraiser positions. There are other things involved in promotion besides just getting that certification, but that's certainly something we can get you more information on. So do we have consensus on this position, or do you want us to move forward on how do you feel about this position?
I was the odd one out here. I'm okay to flag it for now as one FTE, and maybe that's a place that we, if we're looking for further, further discussion, we could come back to.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so the next one that we had some commission support for is I'm just laughing because they're actually trusting me to do math, and that is not always my role, is the continuation of the AmeriCorps position in Self-Help Center. So, and I want to talk about the rating on this one. When staff rated this, we weren't really aware that they were going to be doing self-help, or well, maybe we were. I mean, so what I would say is that low reflection is that the AmeriCorps program in Douglas County is going away. So our concern is if we funded this, if there's not the rest of the AmeriCorps. But I would say even if we funded this, we would want to make it contingent on them getting work-study money.
You want to move it down to the self-help line, the 14,000 as opposed to?
Yeah. Can you move it down one line, Cammie?
Yeah. Thank you. I did have support for this. I thought we were getting quite a lot out of those folks, and I'm always enamored when folks say, without being asked, that they're going to move services around in other places in the county rather than centralizing everything in Lawrence.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. It's a extremely low cost and I think we need to keep promoting the self-help center. It reduces the load on our courts, and I'm fine if we say it's contingent upon getting that if AmeriCorps is going away in Douglas County and we don't have it, maybe we think about it as one-time funds in that situation rather than mill levy. So I'm supportive of it.
I'm the oddball out here. I didn't include it, which, might feel incongruent because I'm certainly very supportive of Self-Help Center and also a former AmeriCorps member. And well, either way, I'm outnumbered and that's fine. But I kind of like the idea of it possibly being a one-time request because I don't, if there isn't work study money or something else that fills in that capacity gap. I mean, we already know AmeriCorps going away, and so paying for it now without any contingency plan just didn't sit great with me. But if it's one-time money not impacting the mill, then I like that better. Contingency, I would defer to staff about that.
I think the one-time isn't as a good solution.
Put it in for one time and somewhat contingent upon them getting the work study money, and then we can talk about it next year. Someone's gonna have to make a note of that because I can't type in it. The next one, and we had some conversation about this, that I think the priority dispatch emergency fire protocols, we need to lower that amount to 28,000 a year, I think.
In 26.
In 20, well, I think the thought is that the difference would come out of one-time funds in 2025, and then the 26,000 would be programmed in, or 28,000 would be programmed in ongoing. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Where is that in our spreadsheet?
It's under ECC.
So we can build this back in so it won't, the 160,000 will not impact fund balance, or not impact FT, mill levy, but it will come out of one time.
It's already in, I mean, yeah, 28,000 will be ongoing. So we'll clean that up in the next version, and then when we show you that, we'll have that cleaned up.
Okay.
The next one, I think that we had some support for, that we need to discuss is, there was some question about maintenance. the position. It looks like I had a commissioner that wanted to remove that item from the proposed budget.
I think that was me. Yes, that was me. And I know construction projects run behind, and I wasn't sure whether to, since this was for half of this year, I'm hoping that we can get through the end of this year. It's a little bit of mill levy down and just make it through the next year. I could be convinced otherwise on this if I'm the odd person out, but I really felt like we need to honor the tax load on our community, and maybe we don't need this just yet since we were just looking at it halfway.
And I guess I thought somebody, starting in July, that if that is a added capacity that is not, I love that Jimmy hasn't added any positions for a really long time, so I tend to believe him when he says he needs this, but also that it would decrease temporary labor costs within that probably first 4 months or so, like summer into fall. So I didn't have any concerns over that money because I felt like a portion of that might actually end up being savings on other line items, but I didn't reflect that anywhere here either, so.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Billy. I had a similar thought after looking back at my notes from when we talked with Jimmy and thought that it would be offset some in that way. I appreciate that thought, Commissioner Kelly, that we don't 100% know when construction is going to start and when there'll be new work, but I am supportive of it, especially after hearing a little bit about the temporary labor and that Jimmy had asked for it to start at the beginning of the year and administration cut that in half to start it in the middle of the year. That feels like a good compromise and a reasonably low impact, but maybe high impact for the maintenance department, relatively low impact on our budget overall.
We certainly won't fill it if the project doesn't move forward on time. We will delay the hire. Okay, the next position is there was some conversation around sheriff's operations. I know we talked earlier about having the sheriff find resources inside his budget to pay for a civil process clerk, which was the one that had some commission support. Do you want us to say he can? Are you looking to add resources to his budget for this, or is this to have him find capacity inside his budget to do this?
I'm personally supportive of adding just the civil process clerk. I think that's a pretty compelling need. And while I'm very frustrated that the state courts changed things and again put a cost burden on us, it is a real cost burden and it has high impact on the community. So I feel comfortable giving that to him. I'm interested, I guess, in what other commissioners think about their budget overall, but that's the one position that I was supportive of and then otherwise flagged that I would like to understand better, maybe not during these deliberations, but later in the year about reentry positions and where it might make sense to fund that from ultimately. But it sounds like there's a larger conversation to be had with the sheriff's office about reentry and their capacity and the way that they function in connection to the specialty courts, along with all the other programs outside of the jail that they're supporting.
I sort of split the difference on this one. It sounded like they definitely need the reentry clerk, and that was included in the proposed budget. I heard two other positions that they needed. My feeling was I felt like getting those PFAs, like that seems really important to me, and they made a good art. So that one, and then if they need that third position, I think they need to attack their own budget a little tighter and see if they can find that third position. We've given a lot of support to the sheriff over the past 2 years. Not that they don't need it, but I think 7 positions was a lot for me.
I was supportive of the reentry clerk that was built in to the budget already. I did hear from both the sheriff and possibly Sarah that there was some confidence that there was possibly some places to mine in the existing budget to self-fund a new position. 2 positions might be a stretch, but I was really hoping for some shared work with that to see if one or two positions, and the ones I had flagged were the civil process clerk and the PC specialist could be self-funded out of the existing mill levy for the sheriff's office.
So where did that just end up?
It sounds to me like there are two commissioners that support the civil process clerk and the built-in reentry clerk. So the built-in reentry clerk, all three of us are supportive of. Two of us are supportive of adding the civil process clerk, is what I heard
That's what I heard.
ultimately.
So we can certainly go with the majority on that, or I throw out, is it possible to split some of the difference there and say, you know, we fund a portion of that FTE and the rest could be found in his budget?
I think it's simpler to say that we fund one. I mean, they did out of, well, I appreciate that 7 was a lot. There were 3 positions highlighted and 2 of the warrants clerk and civil process clerk that in some ways have, I mean, a lot of the same job functions, just with different paperwork and different things to process, but same functions, that would be kind of a shared position if we gave them one. So that was compelling for me. I'm supportive of just funding the one whole position, and they've got to figure out if they can make room in their budget to expand capacity elsewhere, especially around the IT. And I think, you know, IT is just maybe a larger, more global conversation that's been ongoing and evolving between courts IT, Douglas County IT, and sheriff's IT anyhow.
So I'm putting in one civil process clerk at this time.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think that is it for what I see from commissioners on county departments, unless I missed something. I think we're ready to go to community partners. Do you want a small break, or are you ready to keep moving?
I would love a 5-minute break if that's okay with other commissioners.
Yeah, we can take a 5-minute break and come back at actually 10:25. All right, everyone, welcome back, and thank you for the short break. We had gotten through our first pass of discussion on county departments, and we were going to move to community partners. Is that right?
Yep, let me get it pulled up. Okay. Oh. What am I doing? Yeah, why?
It's got a freeze screen.
I think I have a little lag. Artists helping the homeless is our first one. Under community partners, which one is Jake, which is the first one we have 2 commissioners on, since you've got that, Cammie? I didn't look at that before I did. Yeah, that's right. You just read me all.
I just want to point out that I thank you, staff, for going through both. To Commissioner Willie's point, they are in a different order on our spreadsheet, and there's value in that too. But I've just personally found this to really zero in on the options list, that this list is a little bit more digestible for the public too, I think, to look through and see groupings of.
The first one we have is that there appears to be any sort of commission discussion on is DECA, on the medication-assisted treatment in the alcohol opioid use disorder. So I'll move that one up to the top of the screen.
So I had flagged this for discussion. There's in the notes that it said it could possibly come from mental health sales tax, which I think is appropriate, or from the opioid fund, but I didn't know what the capacity in the opioid fund was and what else it's being used for at the moment. Sarah and I had a bit of a discussion that the opioid fund is likely more similar to one-time dollars than anything ongoing. So that's another part of that discussion. And then as we came in today and had a list of things that could possibly move from general fund to behavioral health. One of those also is involved, it's with Heartland Radac, and it's medically assisted treatment. So I don't know that I had enough information yet to know where those services are most needed and where they're best provided, and how it impacts the status quo. So I have it flagged, but it was more flagged for discussion.
I thought it should come from the opioid funds, but I hadn't thought about that it's not one time. I suppose it could come from opioid funds one year and then behavioral sales tax the next. I just, doesn't seem like mill levy impacts to me.
I would be uncomfortable using opioid funds to pay for this ongoing. You all got a memo on that last night, and Jake can pull it up. I don't think we will have enough to support that ongoing from those funds. But it is certainly something that we could pay for at the behavioral health sales tax. And part of, remember, Bob talked about, we want to talk about our substance use funding global, or kind of as a pool, similar to how we do psychiatry. And we could certainly, so instead of this being specifically for DECA, we could add, $172,497 to that fund inside DECA, inside the behavioral health fund, for that process to further evolve, if that's, because currently right now, some of your funding for, all of your funding for Heartland Health is for MAT as well. And so I don't really feel like we have a good understanding of do we really need $425,000 going for MAT? Or do we need more conversations around that?
Does that explain why it has a high rating but not included?
Yeah.
Correct. And so,
And also, I'm just really outside, unless it's for community partners, I'm reluctant to add requests, just because I think it's a commission decision in terms of those policy directives.
yeah.
But we could certainly flag this as something to come out of the behavioral health fund, and then maybe next week have Bob come talk a little bit about how that might work in terms of what he's thinking about in terms of the substance use fund.
I do feel like I don't have a good enough handle to know, is this the right dollar amount? Are we making this a pool that, DECA or others could pull from? Like, we have it in the DECA line. But like I said, it led to a lot more questions for me. I don't mind at this point, and see what other commissioners think about kind of putting that for the moment in the mental health sales tax expense, but I would like to get Bob back for some more information before I would authorize it.
We can do that and not doing anything, and then not transferring additional mill levy to cover it.
Yeah, I'm fine with taking it out of mental health sales tax. I would like us to figure out how we're going to use the opioid funds, though. What I don't want them to just sit there. I want to be really thoughtful about how we use that. Sometimes when we get these settlement funds, we forget about them and then figure we just have to spend something. So I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I agree, Commissioner Kelly. And I thought that, or plan to suggest that the opioid funds were the best use for this. It's helpful to understand that is not very feasible ongoing, but I definitely think we need to figure out what it is that is feasible to spend that money on. And because we've spent a little bit, but I think we've only had one true request come to us for those funds, maybe two in the past year.
I think both of those discussions are important. What's the proper use for those funds? And it may be this. And if so, it doesn't really bother me to kind of pay for that as a pool, as a resource pool for the community out of one-time funds, and recognizing that is something that's going to have to be, we make room for in the future with mental health sales tax. But that's only if that is the right use for those opioid funds.
Let's look into that and get back to you, and we can talk about it next time. Commissioners, I did skip, we had a commissioner that was interested in talking about artists helping the homeless. Their COLA, was that just a mark that we want to talk, or Commissioner Kelly, I think that was one that you had particular interest in?
So Artists Helping the Homeless is one of those organizations that is mostly funded by Douglas County, not entirely, but significantly. And this is one that I think we ought to consider it, but I would like to, I want to have a better understanding of what the wage gap is, and how they determined this was the number. And I don't think we should fund the whole thing. So, and I did this with a couple of agencies. If they're funding just, I could look up what Artists Helping the Homeless is, but let's say Artists Helping the Homeless is 70%. I think we can fund 70% of the wage gap, not 100% of the wage gap, that they should look to other funders to also, so if it's 30%, they need to find 30% from either their contributions or they need to weave that in as well. It should be reflective of the percentage that we fund that organization, not, and we heard some partners say, no, I put 100% of the wage gap in there. I'm not supportive of that.
I had a couple pieces on this, and one was that we had asked them for some additional financial information, so that is yet coming back to us. So I wasn't going to, build anything in until we'd had that information back. Artists Helping the Homeless is doing a lot of work in Douglas County, but they are housed out of another county, and so in terms of like how much we spend of their funding, like I don't have a good understanding of the financial health of the organization as a whole, and is that wage gap between what their employees are paid in Douglas County versus other places where they serve. And on top of that, like last year, we were asked for and complied with paying off debt on a couple of houses. I think they're a fabulous program. I like that we invest in them. I think they do great work in people's lives. The idea of paying off some of that debt was that would roll back into their operations funds, and we didn't necessarily see that. So you said there's more information coming, but that's why I didn't put anything in at the moment for them.
And for me, I didn't plug anything into any of the COLA requests because I just started tripping over myself, oscillating between the requests, trying to figure out some themes and threads, and thought, we need more communication. I appreciate, Commissioner Kelly, that approach that you just described, and think that, sounds like it could be a reasonable way to approach it. With Artists Helping the Homeless in particular, this one is, those are very low wages, and so I'm very supportive of and really critical work in our community. And I'm very supportive of how the community, starts to care more for our care workers and people who are really providing direct services in really difficult situations. And I also heard them talk about exactly a $30,000 savings in their operations after we paid off the real estate for them. And so that number next to this number of $30,000 to close the wage gap just leads me to wonder why that hasn't been done with those funds yet. So that's my particular thinking about this COLA request. I just wanted to state out loud that I think that those wages absolutely should move up, and I would be interested to see Artists Helping the Homeless really invest in that. And maybe we have a responsibility in some of those costs, but I don't think that we do 100%.
The next one so I don't think there's consensus on that one. The next one was the Burt Nash MEI, and I think that's probably a similar situation, Commissioner Kelly.
Yeah, and part of this, I think, is Burt Nash is our #1 mental health provider in Douglas County, #1 in the amount of dollars that we spend on it. And so I wanted to be thoughtful about if we're not spending, I'm conscious that we have significant mental health sales tax capacity built up. And, to Commissioner Reed's point about wanting to make sure we're paying people who work in that sector appropriately, I was having a hard time in my head justifying why we wouldn't use mental health sales tax towards this request. And if we're holding it back, what are we holding it back for? Now, we didn't have the sheet that we were provided today, so maybe that's more of it. I think we have to have a bigger conversation about the dollars that are coming in from mental health sales tax. What all are they going to? Because if we're just holding it because we don't like this, or we don't like that, or we don't like that, then it's just building up. And I think the community has a good question, like, what are we building it up for? And so that's where I put that. There are other things on this list that I know people are very passionate about that I did not fund. And I feel like we have to start thinking about how are we using that mental health sales tax? What are we going to fund?
So certainly that is a discussion that is much more is needed about in terms of the mental health sales tax. I also only want to fund things that I feel are correct to be funding, and that if there is additional capacity, there is the opportunity to turn back mill levy based on what we're currently paying for out of general fund that could be paid for out of mental health sales tax, or what we're transferring money from the general into the mental health sales tax that may be more than is necessary. So I don't feel the need to necessarily to spend it unless I'm very supportive of it. There's more that I need to know about wage differentiation between Burt Nash and our other partners that do work in behavioral health space. I think there's been, at least kind of anecdotally, what I've heard in the community is that they've been able to hire away from some of our other partners because their wages are stronger because of the CCBHC. And so, like, if it's the system of care we're looking at, is that the right place for salary help, or are there other pieces? So not wanting to do that blindly at all, and not sure I had enough information. So I didn't flag anything for that at the moment because that's what I had in my head, but I'm glad to keep learning and keep talking.
Yeah, I'm also glad to keep learning and talking about it. On the surface, though, I'm not supportive of that request, in part for what you just described, Commissioner Willie, and that a significant rise in the amount of staff, and then also, I think, increase in wages across their organization since the CCBHC. I just don't know that I think that it's the county's responsibility to, and maybe the behavioral health sales tax is an appropriate use for this, but we got to figure out a balance of not dipping into that so much that we don't have sort of reserves for potential capital projects or new needs as they come up. So I'm open to exploring that possibility with the behavioral health sales tax to fund it, but I do think that in terms of providers in the community, they've raised their wages and increased their staffing quite a bit. And I heard them say the other day that has increased the gap because CCBHC is only, or because the reimbursements are, I think, was 60%. And so that obviously widens the gap. But I don't know, I was not compelled to support this one yet, but open to further conversation potentially.
And I also kind of rolled this into other COLA requests that I did not fund in my first round here. I have some others that are flagged though, so that we may be looking for, like, how do we be more strategic about those?
Okay. Next one was the Youth Recovery Center one-time request.
So I'm supportive of dollars towards this project. I know this is very early on in the project, and that's part of what gave me a little bit of pause. So, like, there's what's the role of county dollars? Is it seed money to help get fundraising started, or is it this large chunk? So I was thinking really more in terms of maybe half that amount for you to flag for 2025. There you go. With it, and possibly even having them use that as a funding match. I think that the community has an interest in this project and is expected, I think, and anticipated to step up for it. So I know part of the request that they gave us was that the 2 million helps them get to that 40% threshold when then they're available for, like, Sunderland grants and other things like that, which I think that time will come. But my thought was a smaller amount for the initial request, and look for something that is a strategic request in the future for more. Commissioners, what are your thoughts?
So I did not include this. I think that what I heard from our presentation a few weeks ago is that it's not needed to move forward with the project that already has quite a bit of momentum going into it. And I recognize that there was an opportunity that presented itself, and we have to seize those opportunities. And I'm, of course, supportive of there being a youth recovery center. And I think that the train's been moving a little fast, and there's a lot of conversation that the county has not necessarily been a part of, and I'm more interested in that long term. What does it look like for the county to be engaged in supporting the presence of a fully developed youth recovery center, and how that fits into the whole continuum of care and crisis services across the community, and which ones are adult only, youth only, and which ones serve both. I just think there's a lot more to understand about it, and that there was no evidence to me that they really need the money to continue with the momentum that they have in getting the project developed, and that I expect there could very well be and should be, and from my perspective, conversations in the future and requests that might come about how that behavioral health sales tax fund can help support the operations or specific programming perhaps related to the YRC. Yeah, those are my reasons for not being supportive of it.
I think there's a lot of support for this, including for the Youth Recovery Center, including my own, and there's a lot of support for Bert Nash out there. I think it's early in the process. I would like us to wait a little longer to see how their fundraising develops before we put dollars on this. This doesn't prevent us from putting dollars on it. It's just, I think it's a little early, and I want to wait a little bit longer.
I kind of thought I might have been on the smaller end of this, but apparently I am not. Is there any interest in offering something, and I had a million in here as matching for their community fundraising, or is that not a space that we want to work in?
I'm struggling with understanding matching when it's the community that they're asking for dollars on, and the community is then matching it with their tax dollars.
Same. I appreciate the creative approach, but fundamentally it does feel too early, and like the money is not needed. And I think that that's part of the lens that we have to look at all these requests, like what's a significant and imminent need. Even if we have the capacity, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best need for it right now, and those needs could grow and change drastically in the future, and we don't know enough, in my opinion.
So, but it sounds like both commissioners may be open to requests in the future as the project unfolds. Is that a true statement?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Next one.
I had one more thought, and I hope I can. Yeah, I think it may be gone. Go ahead.
Sorry. The next one was Douglas County Conservation District, the COLA costs. There was a percentage in there.
Yeah, commissioners, this is my first, well, the first of many discussions, I think, about COLA. This is another organization that receives most of its funding from Douglas County. I think I can look up the percentage, I think it's 78%. And so it sounds like some of us held off to wait for a COLA conversation, but my proposal is around I got to pull it up here, 3,200, not around, it was $3,265, which reflects the percentage of funding that we provide to Douglas County Conservation District.
So this is one that I built in for the part-time, well, I guess if we're in the upper line, the increasing costs and inflation impacts. I didn't necessarily build that in, but it's in my head. And I'm putting that together with the $20,000 request for the other position. I would say I did serve on the Conservation District Board some years back. When we look at like what their total mission is versus like the dollars that pass through them are actually state dollars, and they're quite large. And so there's two ways of looking at it. If we're comparing to what other community partners would look like, that number would also be reflected as both income and expense going out into the community. And so that really drops drastically the percent that Douglas County funds for them. The way the statutes are written, I think every county is required to give their conservation district $25,000, and the state matches that. Well, the state gives them $25,000 and has never increased it ever. And we've been at $85,000 for a very, very long time. That no longer, I mean, they used to have two positions out of that. They used to also get the some income and help from that NRCS tech position, and that has gone away also. So if we want to still pull down the state dollars for cost share, and I'd have to get that number, it's probably in Susie's notes or in her conversation that we had with her. The funding that we give to them is significant for the impact in the community it has as a whole. I did build in the 20,000, and I kind of had the 4,000 in my head, but did not put that in necessarily until we'd had this conversation.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So Commissioner, we have in your notes that you did build in the 20,000.
I built in the 20,000 and
but
not the
four.
4,000,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify.
I did not build in the 20,000. I mean, I had, I took it off with a few at the final stages of my personal work anyway, because I'm interested in that idea, and I appreciate your insight, Commissioner Willie, and your experience with them. I have a much more limited understanding of and experience with the full breadth of work that they do, but think that it's quite a bit of bang for the buck, so to speak, and that it really is countywide programming. And what I heard from them was a lot of increase in interest and need, and even some policy directives to do more. It's another example of sort of an unfunded mandate. And it is a relatively low cost, and they have not asked for a budget increase for a long time. About the COLA request, now that's helpful to understand the sort of state money pass through and the way that it complicates, I suppose, what the actual number of the percentage that the county is funding of their budget. So I guess that's just a fun way to highlight that the math is hard to figure out what is the reasonable way to approach that. I do, Commissioner Gully, like your approach of determining that percentage. And in this instance, our money to them is not specific to positions. It is operational, and so sort of general dollars. It's not tied to any specific projects or programs. I'm just thinking out loud here. The COLA thing continues to be, it's an evolving conversation as we go through these lines. Not sure where to land on it.
Since we've already wandered into the next line item about the education coordinator, that seems very specific that it could be grant funded. And so that wasn't something that rose up for me.
And to me, I guess why I combined those two conversations is, to me, rather than necessarily pegging that to a position, just whether it's 20,000 or nearly the 24,000, just increasing their allocation for the work. I know there was some discussion, our Commissioner Kelly had asked a question in the meeting about where is the overlap of services and education outreach with other organizations, including our sustainability office. And I feel like sometimes it's the message and sometimes it's the messenger that the conservation district reaches are more conventional farmers in ways that our other outreach methods do not. And so we just have we have some great voices. We need more voices in the sustainable agriculture space and conservation space. And so I would be supportive of something there, but I don't know if we've found a consensus yet.
Can move on. The next one we have is the Extension Council COLA. Did one commissioner express some interest for this?
Sorry, did we, on the conservation district, did we leave that at nothing at this point?
I don't have any for either of those requests, unless I missed something.
All right, no, really interested in seeing something happen here. If I'm the only one there, then we'll have to pass on it.
Which one?
Honestly, to me, it's such a small number that tying it to that position doesn't seem especially helpful. I think just a $20,000 increase to their allocation, I would be supportive of, but I don't know if that's outside of protocol.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that idea, but they asked for a very specific thing that they would want to allocate the dollars to, so.
And they're getting close to this. Actually, Conservation District was our Rubicon for service agreements versus community partners. So if we did fund them, I think they would become a service agreement. Yeah, and so we would tie these to specific things unless you wanted us to not do that.
Commissioners, if we could, let's go to Douglas County Extension, because I want to sort of have a conversation about Conservation District, Extension, this area of work. Is that all right? And then maybe come back to Conservation District, because I took some money here and put it into the commissioner's budget. I think it would be good to spend some time with the Extension Council and understand come to an agreement on what our relationship is. We fund those positions. We fund the healthcare for many of those positions. They have other positions that are funded by Kansas State. And there's some tension, I think, between what their expectations of the county is and then what their independence is outside of that. Only the Public Health Department, I think, is the only other organization that we fund their employee benefits from. And I just want to have a more clear understanding, if we're going to fund benefits, if we're funding COLAs, if we're funding pay equity issues, what is our relationship with Douglas County Extension? And what should they expect going forward, and what are we comfortable with going forward? And I think it overlaps into how does that work with Conservation District and our Sustainability Department, which I think there's a lot of overlaps in land use and some of those issues, not from a planning perspective, but from a conservation perspective. So I put it there to just hold on to it. We have that funding. We may want to move some of that Douglas County Conservation District into it as well, because we just talked about wanting to unpack some of those things. And hold that in the commissioner's budget to have that conversation. That I did not include it in my budget. I included it in the commissioner's budget for a later conversation.
I would say if we're looking at kind of those two entities, because of some similar support that we give them, or similar structural support between Lawrence Douglas County Public Health and the Extension Council, or K-State Extension, I did serve on the Extension Council Board in the recent past also, but I have a quarterly meeting where I meet with the Executive Director for Lawrence Douglas Public Health, and I don't have nearly that access to Extension. So I don't know what other commissioners, what their kind of feedback or communication is with either of those two organizations, but I thought that was an important point to mention.
I think that relationship is by the choice of the Public Health Director. Previously, commissioners didn't meet with Dan Partridge quarterly. It was just something Jonathan's been doing. So there's I've seen Extension councils work much closer with Board of County Commissioners.
We currently fund 65% of Douglas County Extension. And so I think that's something what role do we want to play in their goals, in their programs, or do we think that the Douglas County Extension Council Board is the one that should be setting those goals? I just think that needs to be a bigger conversation before we have had large requests from them. This supplemental request is an 11% increase on their current budget. If we're going to see those continual requests at that percentage, we've got to have a deeper conversation about what our role is with Douglas County Extension.
some of that goal setting, because of how they are set up, also comes from K-State Extension, because so some of those kind of fundamental things won't come through us, because that's the way extension councils are set up to exist.
We can leave this on a list of follow-up items at the end of deliberations to come back and sort of, as we're thinking about what do we want to talk about this fall, since I don't necessarily see consensus for funds on this line item, unless I'm missing something.
No, I think that makes sense, and Commissioner Kelly, I agree with you. I think there's a bigger conversation to be had with Extension as one of those community partners that we do have such a significant share of their portion, obviously complicated by all the factors just highlighted. So I appreciate your approach of holding that money. Can I just clarify, was that the COLA money specifically? Because they made a number of requests. The only one that I highlighted as potential interest for me is the COLA request, along with everybody else's.
I put the COLA request, the pay equity issues, and the increased supply cost and utilities, those three items. The other four were not on my list.
Okay, thank you.
And I put a placeholder number. I put 20,000 to kind of capture some of those that you mentioned, so that having that discussion in a more fleshed out way suits me just fine with either the amount that I put in or the amount that you put in. I did also flag the Live Well contribution. I'm not entirely tied to that, but I really wanted to know more about the future of funding there. I also put a note in for the 15,000 Live Well contribution. That's to offset some of the portion of their executive director for Live Well Douglas County, which I believe works on Douglas County health plan. Or in response to it. And I mentioned that if a grant was found for that through Extension, that money could possibly turn back to Extension. So trying to say that if there are grant possibilities there, how do we make sure that those are pursued actively? So that was another place to possibly, I don't know that necessarily frees up that funding, and it's a little bit iffy there maybe to do it that way because it's an unknown, but that was another piece that I had flagged out of the Extension budget.
I think that's part of the difficulty because, I mean, they could certainly, we really can't direct them right now to go get more grants. If they did get a grant and come back with needing a request, we entertain those all the time from departments and agencies. So I don't think there's anything stopping them that if they got a grant to help offset this and they needed some additional help or it was going to free something up, we could certainly have those conversations. But that whole notion of like your direction in terms of what grants are you seeking, I think that's the hard part. Is there other discussion on the Live Well contribution?
I just think it needs to be part of a larger. I'm interested at how Live Well lives within Douglas County Extension, because it sounded like it used to be part of the health department, and I'm trying to understand, like, does it need to sit on its own? It has its own group. Maybe it would live well within our sustainability department. I don't know right now, and I'm not ready to fund it until we have a little more conversation with that partner.
And I don't know what level of feedback or reporting we get from Live Well if they're accomplishing county business. So that was the other piece that I had flagged that would be okay. So if in the future we wanted to direct them to come to us on their own, that also opens the conversation for what do we expect to receive as the county for the funds that are going to offset the executive director.
Next one we had some conversation about amongst commissioners was the Historical Society's COLA for $333,222.
I tried to be really mindful not to create too many, we need to have more conversations about this, but here's some back-to-back, because I agree about the Extension Council and then the Historical Societies. I think for a variety of reasons, there's just a lot to talk about there. And so I've been really appreciative of and impressed with how they have collaborated in recent years and brought these funding requests before us. and appreciate the approach of where they really narrowed in on the two costs that almost all of them were experiencing and brought a request forward with that. And we talked a little bit the other day about how there's a couple of those that are in some dire straits because of other circumstances and some ongoing conversations that just leave things like for Blackjack and Santa Fe Trail, for example, up in the air enough that it makes me nervous to allocate funds yet, just because I feel like there's more to understand about the totality of circumstances for all those partners and what is the fair and reasonable approach for how to really infuse each of those agencies with some of those cost of living increases. I'm not supportive. I could be persuaded, but did not include the one-time half the cost. But I could be persuaded on that. And then I suppose even though we got it as a separate request, the one from Santa Fe Trail, similar thinking with that combined request, the sort of COLA or cost of operations increase. I just think we need to have a bigger conversation outside of budget about all of those organizations and some of the situations that they're faced with right now.
So this one was my gateway into possibly funding some COLA requests. I did build in the 32,000, the 33,000 that we're looking at here. I also built in the 25,000 as a one-time request, so that's not reflecting mill levy, but because they had that covered for the years in the future, with the idea that that is a position under the Watkins, but it would free up capacity to also work across that ecosystem of partners. I'm not entirely against the Santa Fe Trail. They're what's given me pause both last year and this year is the instability of their financing because of some, just rough things that have happened to them rather than from them. But I also really enjoy the history that they capture there and don't want to see that go away. I would love to see that work supported in ways that we're not doing much for them now. So these were all areas that interest me, all of our historical partners here, and I'm just thinking this now that's a possibility that some of those may be helped if we're talking about some one-time issues out of the ARPA open space, but I don't know if that fits quite as well as like Blackjack would on their own. I did have a conversation with Sarah. Are there pieces we should be kind of holding in our budget for contingencies around some of those organizations that are struggling? And open space was possibly a placeholder already for that. So that's a long way of saying that I would like to see us do more for our historical societies. And it's not a lot of dollars. And I think we get a lot of economic development out of these that churns through the community. I think these are dollars that are well spent.
I included half on their COLA request, partially because we are not the primary funder for these historical societies, but I think we play a big role. To Commissioner Reed's point, I think there's a larger conversation to have about Douglas County Historical Societies and what the overall support is for that. We talked about Santa Fe Trail. I think the county certainly needs to protect those resources and make sure we maintain them. Who does that? I think it is, is that something that can be done by the Historical Society, the Douglas County Historical Society, with some other support from us? I know there's loss there when we talk about merging, and we heard a little bit of that tension during our conversation the other day about, who is making the decisions for the group. But I do think there is an opportunity to look at, to go to sort of the next step with our historical societies. They've certainly taken a great step on providing collective proposals to us. And what I did hear on the collection assistant was that that is a collective move. I funded it again at half of their half. Again, challenging them to see if they can find the rest of it. I could be convinced to go all the way on that. But I put half for the Historical Society's COLA request and half for the temporary collection assistant. And I think we need to talk about Santa Fe Trail. I have your same concerns, Commissioner Willie, about their ability to continue to support all the things that they're trying to do. What we heard was a little dire. Can you be a little dire? I'm not sure that's a thing.
You're either dire or you're not.
Yeah, yeah. So that's where I was on this. It does fall into let's have some more conversation, but I think it's them that need to have the conversation about how they want to organize themselves and support each other, and then come to us with how we can help.
So two things that kind of worked in favor for me for this, two of many, was that the high role that volunteers play in all those organizations, and they're not asking for a salary cost of living. They were asking for things like related to the buildings that they take care of on behalf of the population, on behalf of that history. And so that to me was kind of like the gateway into talking about these other COLA requests, and why this one felt easier to support for me, because it was really about the buildings and utilities, which I know we've had those requests too, but it was not staffing related. So that was one piece of it. And the other was how well they've been collaborating together and how hard that is, and wanting to honor that work, because I think that will be great for the community on an ongoing basis and has been already. So those were, so I'm still really in favor of that 33,000. The 25,000 in terms of it being a one-time request for half of a position for 1 year. The position is actually, they have the donor that will cover half of the position for 3 years, and they were planning to get years 2 and 3 from grant funding. So I feel like that was really a 1/6 of the overall cost, and that felt like a pretty good investment.
Yeah, I would be supportive of it if we moved it to one-time funds. I'm not supportive of it ongoing mill levy.
I have it in one time, the 25,000.
I'm good with that. For that, it sounds like maybe unsure, and we need to circle back to the COLA request, since one commissioner funded it fully, one commissioner funded it at half. There's still a couple more COLA things, but you're right, Commissioner Willie, it is a different type of request than the other COLA requests, and it's relatively modest also, and I can appreciate that. So I'm open to it, but I don't know that I hear total consensus about full or half, so maybe we come back to that.
I hear consensus on the temporary collection assistant for one-time dollars for Watkins.
Any other talk about the Santa Fe Trail? They are certainly living on fumes, and so little comes from us that, but it's.
I would really like to have a larger conversation with them about where their financial health is and what's going on. We already own some of their property, so I'd want to dig into what are those expenses. So, I mean, I'm not opposed. I mean, if we were to come back mid-year and say we want to fund $6,000, we have the ability to do that. But I do think it's worth having a conversation specifically with them.
Yeah, and Sarah just triggered something in my mind, and we'll get to another community partner later. Like at some point when we get to requests of $5,000, not that it's not important, but I think we need to think like, how do we roll that into something collectively? And I understand that from what I heard yesterday, that was a request that was brought to the collective group and was turned down by the collective group, and so then was brought to us. But $5,000 is a small amount of money in our overall budget, and we've spent how much time on it now?
Our next one that has some conversation is KU Small Business Development, I believe.
be honest, I can't remember if I ended up leaving this one in or not. I just want to highlight again that I think it's great that they came to us directly for this. That clarifies and cleans things up for me personally a little bit, and how our economic development partners are funded. I think that I'm open to their additional $10,000 request. It's relatively small, but I think ultimately I might have left it off because 30,000 has been what we've funded. But we just brought it back to 30,000 last year. Is that right? Sorry, this is when I start to do things from memory and don't know where to locate it in my notes right away. But I think 30,000 is what we just moved it back up to. So
Yeah, 30,000 is programmed in for KU small business.
But I think they've always gotten it just as a pass-through through the chamber. So even when the chamber was cut, the chamber maintained that 30,000. So I don't know that it's a restoration at all. I think it's just that we're getting it directly. Is that your memory?
I don't know. I think so.
Yeah, I didn't add in the additional 10, very supportive of the 30.
I did add in the additional 10. I think we're making some headway at EDC with how all the different parts of economic development work together. Ideally, I understand we didn't like it passing through the chamber, but I think there is some opportunities down the line to get a clearer picture from the Economic Development Corporation, separate from the chamber, on what our strategies are for economic development when it comes to entrepreneurship, recruitment, workforce development. I think that's work for us to do among this commission and on the EDC. But I think that we continually need to support entrepreneurship and small business development. The process of hooking big companies to come to town with incentives, it is an older technique, and building from within and starting with small businesses and having them be here, I think is what we need to focus on. And so that request for 10,000, I was supportive of.
And I value their role in that ecosystem, and I don't have a problem building in that 10,000.
Yep, thanks for making a case for it, Commissioner Kelly.
So the next one was public health. So that they put in.
So for public health, I should have brought my computer so I could look at my spreadsheet, because now I don't know if this matches what I put in the spreadsheet for you, Cami, but I believe that I included both the 28,800 for commodities and then suggested lowering the amount of the Wellness Wednesday request. I want to have more conversation about that with commissioners, and curious to hear what their perspective on that was. I'm supportive of it and wonder if I don't want to see the program go away, but I also wonder if it's a shared cost with the city. It's a little bit more of an even split than what is being proposed in the budget. So I think I built in 35, which is half of what the total amount their budget said that Wellness Wednesday would cost to continue.
And on the vaccines, I do want to say, I believe this is the full cost of the increased cost for the vaccines. We have a partnership with the city of Lawrence here that they pay 40% of all local costs. So I'm not sure if we put this 28,000 in, my assumption is it might take a year for it to get built in on the city side. So this may change over the years. Does that make sense to commissioners?
And I struggled within these 3 line items here because, like the Wellness Wednesdays, it falls directly under the city's strategic plan and their piece of homelessness, in that it's when it's going out to the shelter as part of that Wellness Wednesdays. Now I recognize that the county or the county ARPA funds helped cover the cost of that vehicle, and so it's either the vehicle needs to be fully employed in doing that work, or it needs to be sold and go away. Like, we have to decide as a community, is mobile health outreach, which I think that they are probably the best poised to do in the community, is something that we want to support. So I also don't want it to go away, but want to see the city taking responsibility over the portion of it that directly impacts their needs.
Yeah, I struggled with these 3 lines, to be honest with you. I want to see Wellness Wednesdays continue, and we supported the vehicle. So it seems I will be open that I'm disappointed that, you know, Heartland Health hasn't played a bigger role in doing Wellness Wednesdays, and I hadn't really thought about until this discussion the role of the city. You know, we do fund part of the shelter, so maybe it's a percentage of that cost. Commodities related to vaccines, I get, I believe in vaccines. I think they work, but I get a little nervous about paying for healthcare costs over and over again when I don't understand the relationship between Heartland Health, our FQHC, and public health, and where do those divide. I didn't fund that. I can be convinced on each one of those to go a different way. I'm really interested to hear commissioners talk about that. The last one, the 58,000, I think I saw down in the mental health sales tax as a one-time request, so I didn't include it here.
Yeah, I also had a note for that to look at line, well, for my spreadsheets, 153, because I added a few for the 58,000.
We have consensus around the suicide prevention programming.
Under
behavioral
one-time
health sales tax
behavioral
one
health,
time.
okay. Yeah, so between those two, I don't know that I have enough to convince you. As you say, I did not build in those, but I flagged them. Oh, no, I guess I built that in one time. Looks like I built in one time for the 42,000, but that was with the note to have the discussion, and that was kind of between those two, both of those programs. And I know that the vaccines, from what I understand from Jonathan, is those used to be provided for free from the federal government, and that is no longer the case, and that's why the need there. I'm actually probably okay funding that, but I don't know that I have enough of a strong case to, if others are not.
Sarah, I wonder if you could give us could illuminate why that was marked, wait, let me make sure I'm looking at the
medium.
right line. Yeah, a medium priority, and what, this is we've talked a little bit on this commission over the years about how, public health department here is an independent body with its own independent board, and is predominantly funded by tax dollars. And so we've kicked around the conversation a little bit about what might the public health being a county department, which is very common in other places, look like. And so anyway, Sarah, I just wonder if you can give us some insight about the low and medium. There's a high, low, and medium request with the health department, and what you're thinking along the medium was for that commodities.
I mean, really, just because it was a COLA, in essence, I saw this as a community partner COLA. So, and all of those got mediums from us. But, it is valid that if they were a county department and I had seen a request for $28,000 for vaccines, we would have funded it.
And I didn't take that as a COLA, but as a changing federal circumstances. So
Yeah.
I guess I would be supportive
One
of.
half dozen or another. Yeah.
Right.
Most vaccines go up in price and they have to figure out how to do it. I mean, it's kind of unusual that the federal government is paid for these vaccines. This is specifically COVID vaccines. I think they pay for their smallpox vaccines that they do for other people. So,
Yeah, so this felt like a change in circumstances. And I didn't have it built in, but very possibly should have.
I'm fine including it.
okay, so we have consensus for the 28,000. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely wanted to include that. Maybe, again, feels like there is certainly more to unpack about the Wellness Wednesdays and mobile outreach. I think that's a really critical piece of our continuum of care and services, but can appreciate that it's new enough that there's still some outstanding questions about the best strategy for that, and along with that, what the responsibility of payment looks like. I'm just a big fan of choices, for one, when it comes to healthcare and accessible healthcare for the most vulnerable and uninsured, underinsured folks in our community, and the value of that mobile health brings and bringing it to where people are at, and just fundamentally like accepting that there are some people who will never be convinced to or interested in going to Heartland Healthcare for fully integrated care, right? And that I think that a spectrum of options and still being able to fill in some of those gaps in healthcare and through street outreach and that mobile van is just something that I'm really invested in us figuring out how to continue that work, but recognize that, you know, it was prioritized by staff as low on our sheet. I think in part for what we talked about here, the city's role, a clearer picture of what all of the healthcare partners are doing to work together and collaborate on making some efficiencies and a better spectrum of choices for people. So, I mean, I'm okay with not including it, but I want to not lose that thread of the conversation, and that maybe I think it's an important strategy in our A Place for Everyone plan in particular, and helps create a connection point to behavioral health and other crisis intervention services too.
So I had this built in as one-time funds with the idea that that kept it open for that conversation of what is the future of funding for that program.
Thank you for saying that. You did say that before, and it left my brain, so thanks for repeating it. I like that idea.
That's fine.
I will say this one time. We can put it in for one time. They'll be back.
Well, I was just going to add to that, this could dovetail nicely with a future update around LDCFM's Mobile Integrated Health Program. These programs are working together, and the commission funds Mobile Integrated Health. And I think some nice updates on that program maybe later this fall, and how these teams are integrating Wellness Wednesdays, Mobile Integrated Health. It's happening. And so we could dovetail that in to get ahead of a future ongoing request that Sarah's alluding to, and she's not wrong there.
Thanks, Jill. Let me make this other suggestion, commissioners, and see what we think. So when it comes to the shelter and the emergency and LCS, currently the county funds just under 10% of that. However, it's almost 50-50, not quite 50-50 when it comes to the health department. This seems like an outreach of the health department. Maybe the thinking is that we would fund half of this out of our mill levy, expecting the city would do their part to fund the other half, since it seems to be an outreach of public health.
And in which case you would put that as an ongoing expense.
That's how I built it in, was the 35,000, the total amount that they said they were asking of the city and the county was 70,000, but with just a different cost share that they were asking for. So I brought that down to 35 each, because that seemed fair and reasonable. And I appreciate your logic about the fact that we fund 50% of the health department.
We actually are 60%.
60, okay.
So one of the ways we could do this is if it's similar to we could include it for funding through public health. I would want to outline it as specific towards Wellness Wednesdays. I do think if we would direct public health to then include this in their 2025 request to the city of Lawrence for overall funding for public health. I do think if the city is successful getting an extension of the affordable housing tax, and then there's going to create some possibilities for them to help cover these things. But I would, I mean, if I can help guide how it happens, I think that's cleaner for our operations as opposed to a one-off 50-50 thing, if that's okay. So we will include it and then talk to public health about how this gets built into their City of Lawrence budget in 2026. And if, does that make sense?
You want us to include that as an ongoing expense, but expecting that the city will stand up and take their share, even though we said we'd cover it? Not sure.
No, I'm saying, what I'm saying is that we will take the first year's implementation, and then they will build in the second year into their ongoing city share.
No, I don't want to do that. I
Okay.
appreciate that, and I understand it's easier, but I think if we stand it up this year, we will be expected to continue it forever.
And it's really hard for me to do that on their agreements, to say I'm paying 60% of all of this stuff except for this one thing that I'm paying 100% of. So we'll do our best if that's okay, in terms of how that goes. But it's just really hard to manage those agreements.
Yeah, with the 58,000 that I think we're going to talk about further down in the, maybe next or maybe further down, for the suicide prevention, that's from us, and that's 100% to the health department.
But it's one time, so I'm less worried about a match on a one-time thing. But we can do it that way. So what is your consensus on Wellness Wednesdays then? 50% of it ongoing? Or was it 100% ongoing?
50% of the total cost of Wellness Wednesdays. So I had that calculated at 35,000 from us, 35,000 from the city, hopefully. Because if I'm remembering right, the request said that they were, so the current funding is ESG or Community Block Grant, right? Jill, sorry, I might be.
Yeah, it's one-time
tripping over.
CDBG COVID funds.
So are they asking for it from the city?
I thought that's what I understood from their narrative, is that they were asking for some
Yes.
from us, some from the city.
Yes.
So that I thought, I was under the impression it was already in the city's budget request also for this year.
I don't know if it's been included or not. I think it's been submitted.
Been requested.
It's been requested, yeah. But we can confirm that with Jonathan.
And that 2842, so the 42 they're asking us is representative of our 60% funding.
The 42 is representative of the 60% funding. Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Okay.
I did want to say, as it relates to Wellness Wednesdays as well, that the opportunity to fund that with that one-time money, yes, it did come from the city, but those came out of conversations that were the work group from A Place for Everyone that the county's been a lead convener on to provide that medical care. So that was that using that CDBG money was just a result of getting creative on what funds could be used to start having that capacity out at the shelter. That one-time CDBG grant was initially flagged to, I believe, fund some improvements at the Lawrence Community Shelter, but those weren't able to happen within the timeline because of all the requirements that go into you have to have in place for some of those CDBG funds, and this was the easiest way to spend those funds down. But like Jonathan mentioned when he was here, there's limitations on them. So I just want to make sure I'm flagging that, that this project came out of a work group that the county has been a lead facilitator on, and Bob's been one of my partners on that as well.
If the 42,000 already is our 60% share of that, then I think we could just go forward with
Yep,
it.
I'm fine with that.
Build it in ongoing. Okay, so three commissioners were supportive of a one-time request from the behavioral health sales tax for the suicide prevention programs. So we'll go ahead and get that one built in. Any other discussion on it? Okay. The next one would be O'Connell Children's Shelter. And we had a commissioner who suggested funding one of these.
Yeah, I've suggested funding one, but I would suggest we move it to the mental health sales tax. Truancy is a behavior, and I think we could see it as prevention for mental health issues, and would recommend that we do one. We have seen an increase in the number of truancies. They made a good case for that, I thought, and would recommend that we put that in the mental health sales tax.
And that would be an ongoing 1 FTE.
Yes.
So I recognize that truancy is a conversation that our community, it's continuing to harm our community. What I don't understand really is, these different methods of approaching it, and, where the funding, where additional funding would be most useful and helpful. I know there were some discussions amongst partners about differences in how they accomplish that work. So I'm not at all opposed to funding a position. I just wasn't quite sure, where the right need was. But this is something that you feel confident that this is the spot to correct.
I feel like that truancy work group that was Pam did is Pam still here? Pam did such a good job of working with, and the way that they're approaching it, instead of reactionary. It used to be that those supports weren't happening until after the courts were involved. They are now involved prior to it being at the courts level. Therefore, there's been an increase in the number of, if we can keep them out of the courts, that's what we want. And so it's reasonable to me when I hear them say, well, we've had an increase in the number of cases we're working on, that we would fund one. I like I said, we have a lot of money in that mental health sales tax fund, and this seems like prevention for me.
Appreciate that, Commissioner Kelly. I ended up not including, I had actually one position included also, and I didn't think about it being eligible for mental health sales tax, so I appreciate that thought, and that definitely makes me supportive of it. The only reason I ended up removing it was just that mill levy impact, and there were a few things that I initially was supportive of that was one I didn't flag as being eligible for behavioral health sales tax. So, but if it is, and there's no reason from staff to believe that it wouldn't be, then I'm definitely supportive of that. And Commissioner Lee, I appreciate your point. I think that there is more for us to understand as a commission about the evolution of some of that work, but there has definitely been progress that is being made, and partners working with each other and with the county in more meaningful ways, it seems, in recent years, and that the impact is that it is driving down the amount of cases that are getting to court, and creating some meaningful impact. And the numbers going as high as they have is compelling to me, that there's a need for that in our community, even if it's only one of the two agencies that are really working to attack this issue. It puts a dent in it, I think.
Commissioners, I do want to make sure, I think we have made a lot of work in truancy. There's some other pieces of our funding for O'Connell that I still don't have a lot of clarity as to how those cases are managed and how that overlaps. So just don't forget that piece too, that I think overall they get like $225,000 from the county. So do we have consensus to put one in, or just?
Does it indeed fit under behavioral health?
At this point, I would need to do a little more investigation to see if they can give us some demographic information, but I do think there are links to truancy and prevention of substance use and behavioral health issues. So I would be putting it under prevention, Bob, is what I would think would be the conversation. You need to probably come up. Want to give me your microphone, Cammie?
What I would say is that this is a conversation I'd appreciate some more opportunity to have conversation about, but in the CHIP steering committee with the behavioral health plank, one of the 4 objectives that group is recommending is to reduce truancy as a prevention strategy.
And I think that's huge and ought to be a great savings if we can do upstream work on our youth and on our criminal justice system. So yes, if it can be built in with mental health sales tax, I'm in favor of a position.
Okay, so our next one would be STA Care Center. We had a commissioner that was supportive of adding funds for STA.
So that was me, in part because it's a really modest request. And I thought that their narrative was pretty compelling about sort of a different approach to economic development and public safety, sort of hand in hand. It was compelling to me, and I'm interested to see what's possible with helping fund that Safe Work program a little bit. Again, on I don't know that it fits squarely enough at all within prevention efforts that we talk about in the behavioral health sales tax, but I thought it was some pretty compelling idea around how to impact employers across Douglas County. And so I was supportive of that. Another reason was, it was kind of a combined request with the Safe Work program and some VOCA grant instability. We've got from last year's budget, 2 amounts that are held in our commissioner's budget currently for the Willow and for the DA's Center around possible instability with some of those federal dollars that those agencies really rely on. And so, and those requests were a little bit more significant that we have held set aside in case of those funds going away. So for those reasons, I was supportive of $20,000 for Care Center.
Yeah, I guess I was surprised we didn't hear more about the VOCA VAWA grant instability. I know that, and then I was making the assumption that those grants, came through in the ways that they were needed for the DA's office and for our other community partners. And that's why I didn't build it in. I felt like perhaps, and we definitely want to encourage our partners and departments to go for grant funding, and don't want to just say, well, we'll pay for it if you don't. I'd rather be that backstop. So like I said, I didn't build it in, but I'm open to arguments.
I didn't build it in because I think if VOCA happens, and it should happen, by the way, then we've set a mill levy against that we didn't need. I would rather look at, if it doesn't happen, we have significant fund balances that this amount of money wouldn't put a shocker in. But I didn't want to add it to the mill levy. I'm trying to keep the mill levy tight.
Remember my question from earlier that is relevant again now. In years past, we typically are very shy about entertaining any budget requests outside of our budget timeframe, except possibly under that mental health, the sales tax that we have sometimes entertained requests outside of this particular timeframe. Is that still the case, or was that kind of as this conversation was maturing? And I was thinking about that in terms of like the Burt Nash request, if their situation were to change or as that situation evolves. But I'm thinking of that also with like the VOCA conversation here.
I mean, what I'd say is I would really prefer that just random requests for more money not come to us outside of the budget process. If a partner had some sort of extreme situation where they lost a substantial amount of their grant funding, obviously we can take that forward to the commission. But I don't want to send the message to the community that, hey, a month from now you want $5,000, come see us, if that makes sense.
I sort of struggle with this request on 2 ends, right? Pretty much every organization could say, I might not get this grant, so therefore can you make sure you are the backstop for it? And I think to Sarah's point, every time someone doesn't get a grant, I don't want them coming to us and saying, hey, can you cover the difference? Like,
That would be millions.
yeah. So I
But if
think
there
I'm
was
just a
something
little-
with VOCA and VAWA, I think like our partners know that we are
Right.
funding in that space, and they have gotten funding through the governor's budget for 2024 in this side, in this.
It's a different budget year, so that's
Yeah, their
part of the
state
problem.
budget year, so, but it is far more vulnerable in the governor's budget than it was before, so.
I appreciate this conversation. I think, part of me including it was the congruency with those two set-asides that we made last year that we didn't receive from the care center specific to the same situation being faced. And it is very public safety oriented dollars that if they were to go away would have significant impact. So, but, I guess it just makes me question, we still have those lines set aside in the commissioner budget for the two requests last year. It won't be until, we do know that the money has come through currently, and I believe that it's October, well, different grants, different cycles, but like it'll still be several months before we know if another cut is faced. So I guess that just brings me to a space of, does it feel appropriate to keep that money that we have set aside still for those potential loss of federal funds for the two agencies for the rest of this year, which is impacting our mill. And so I'm just trying to find some congruency in that with this particular request, and then the two more substantial amounts that we have set aside and still waiting in the wings.
I have it built in for 2024 only at this stage.
And when do we know if those funds are not required? That's October?
I rely on the agency to tell me.
So that, I'm just saying that timeframe hasn't passed yet that we know of.
Yeah, we think it's October.
Yeah, I think it's October for all of them.
So if we do know in October, we'll know whether it will hit our fund balance. And then if it hits our fund balance, then we could look at it again. I guess that's the point. It's going to fund balance and we could use it in the future. I know that's not the way we like to do things.
You got an eye roll. I'm comfortable not building it in and just being sensitive to that conversation may still be unfolding in the community.
I skipped Senior Resource Center. I think we had a commissioner who had some additional funding on Senior Resource Center.
I would suggest that seeing that it's 11:43, that there are two organizations we start tomorrow with, or at some point tomorrow. One is Senior Resource Center, and the other is Kansas Holistic Defenders, that I put dollars in our commissioner budget to have longer conversations about. That would be my suggestion.
I'm good with that. If by tomorrow you mean Monday, after we've
That's right. I don't think
taken a
about
breath over the
weekends as
weekend.
weekdays, yes.
Just want to
You're not
clarify for
retired
the
enough
public,
yet
nobody
to
should
start-
show up or try to tune in on Saturday morning. We won't be here.
We've done Saturdays before though, so
We
yes, it's
have.
good to clarify that we're not meeting tomorrow.
And we only have one other request to review other than that. So we can bring, and that would be around the Eudora Chamber. So that has any sort of conversation. So we can start on Monday with those conversations around those three. What we can also do is that we can put these into the spreadsheet, and that is kind of tentative conversations that you've already had today. So you see where you're at in terms of that. And I think we can bring back some conversations about the behavioral health sales tax fund, and if some projects are moved to that fund without mill levy coming with it, what is our capacity? Because I want to make very sure that we're not overextending our capacity in that fund. So I think we're going to want to do that on Monday as well.
Will we get some of that information to stew on over the weekend, like the updated spreadsheet from the conversation so far? It's a lot to ask.
I mean, I think we can give you that part. I don't know that I can give you all the behavioral health stuff today, but I can give you the status of where we are, what we've determined this morning.
The list of things that you gave us for potential behavioral health sales tax, I don't see line for line. They've got to be, yeah, this has got to be already in here. The end of the criminal justice services budget. I think maybe some of these line items are here, but they're not dollar for dollar the same.
None of those. I don't think any of the ones on this sheet we got today are included on our budget options.
No.
Is that correct?
They're not.
Not in the budget options. Sorry, I'm back in the budget book where we had flagged 618,918 out of the criminal justice services that was specific to our specialty courts.
Sure. I think it's,
Maybe it is. So
pretty sure it's, where's the additional information we gave them today?
it's page 108 out of our budget books, and it was the last 3 items on that list. And it's just it's DECA 250,722, the other 2 line items I have here.
So we have, there's an additional one in there, and one of them, so we have the behavioral health court at 2.
I think they're just maybe split. I think maybe if
Okay.
we were to add that 212 and the 38, we're getting to,
With behavioral health and drug court.
okay, I think
Okay,
we're
we'll
there.
reconcile that and bring
Got
it
it.
back to you on that part. Yeah, these should match up.
Yeah, I think I'm finding it. So I was just curious if
No,
we
it
had,
doesn't.
I was
Or we
hoping
call
we
them
had another
different
spot to
things.
dig in, but we do not.
Yeah, I would definitely I want to be very clear about capacity within that behavioral health fund and what that looks like if we were to utilize that for a bunch of these. It's a mixture of one-time and ongoing requests that we've talked about, right? And these additional ones that we just discussed and were brought to us today. So a clear picture of that would be really helpful for me and is sort of a key conversation that I want us to have when we come back together next week.
We'll focus on the ongoing piece of that, and I hope we can probably get that to you today.
Okay. And the other thought just flew right out of my head, so I'm going to mute myself, see if it comes back.
Yeah, we just need to.
And I think what we've given staff direction for up until now is to, give us some pieces that can move to behavioral sales tax, not chase those with general fund allocation for that, but not decreasing at this point the general fund allocation that is currently going into behavioral health sales tax fund.
Yeah,
Is
and
that correct?
commissioners, this should match. They just broke out
I got it.
the
yeah.
286 into one additional
I
line.
appreciate that.
Yeah, and then we added the Bob's salary, but not his benefits. So I would want us to do a calculation on that and figure out what we can do with that.
Okay. I did have some other notes on other community partners that were not
Yeah,
part of
so
that, so we'll get to that on
I think
Monday
then,
also.
yeah, then Monday we'll need to go through base community partners if there's conversations we want to have around that. So we'll make a note that once we kind of get reconnoitered, one of my favorite words, with those things, then we can come back through existing community partners.
Do you have what you need from us for those things that you're working on?
Yes.
All right. Commissioners, are there other things that you want to talk about in the next 10 minutes, or would you like to recess till Monday?
We can let it go. We're almost there. Can we just talk about the Eudora Chamber? Is that the last line that there's question for staff about where our consensus lies? Because
It
that would
is,
tidy it up for me
Yeah, let's
before the
just
weekend.
do it.
I can do
That would make it tidy for me too.
Get
So
it
this
going.
is, not digging into, community partners based funding, but just that conversation about the Eudora Chamber. Am I the only one that had something there? I just flagged it for conversation of putting 10,000 in one-time funds offered to this, if the city of Eudora would match it. Right now, the city of Eudora is not funding their chamber. If they wanted to.
But we
I
got
was-
communication today that they are.
Okay, I have not read through the communication that landed on our desk here, because it was marked in their notes that the city was putting in, is it 11? And then they decided that was actually just fundraising.
But they clarified that
Okay, it is from the city.
It is from the city, but it is for some pretty specific things. So it's
Or at least clarified that maybe the way I asked the question the other day might have just confused the situation. And she didn't think that, and she's also new to the position, which I appreciate that there's a lot that she's learning, but that 11,000 that we saw reflected from the city of Eudora is in fact from the city of Eudora. So we're not the only government entity being asked to fund.
Okay.
I did not include it, and one of the reasons I didn't is I think that I would like to see us really focus on economic development in this role, and I think if there was a role for Eudora to play in the economic development, they could go to the EDC and ask the EDC to be thinking about how to fund that through there, rather than each local chamber coming to us for dollars. I really want it to be focused on recruitment of business, retention of business, and workforce development. And I really want to keep pushing for that be the EDC's role. And I'm specifically saying the EDC and not the EDC chamber. I would like us to get to a place where we don't say they are the same thing. They are separate entities. So, yeah.
That discussion is incredibly important.
Yes.
The differentiating between those two entities, very different roles, they answer to different people, have different boards, et cetera, even though they're employing at this point the same staff or similar staff. So I know that just putting something in there muddies the waters because we didn't get a request from the Baldwin City Chamber. City of Compton doesn't have a chamber. So I had really just put it as like, if we needed a chance to poke the city of Eudora, if they weren't investing in it, but it sounds like they are, it changes the conversation for me. I would just pull that for now, and I'd probably read through the supplemental and see if there's anything that I would need to bring back to it. But I do think chambers going to the EDC as opposed to coming here outside of that conversation is valuable.
Yeah, I would concur. I think year after year, I've become uncomfortable with the idea of funding chambers specifically, in part because, well, there's a huge discrepancy in the amount of funding between the three in my first year. And then Eudora kind of fell off and we didn't hear from them for a couple of years, but we were hearing from Baldwin, and now that's flipped this year. And I, for all the reasons you just talked about, Commissioner Kelly, I do think that our focus and the conversations and values of this commission in recent years has been focusing the conversation about what the EDC is doing, responsible for, and focused on. And to me, that all the chambers, there's 3 now, there could be more in the future. I don't know if the Compton will open its own or if, some counties have chambers too. It feels like the EDC should be a place where those chambers are going to for some potential direction about what their role in those larger community-wide goals are. And perhaps the evolution of those conversations means that there are pools of money available for certain projects or programming or incentives as they might exist in different corners and spots around the county.
And our current EDC is working in Eudora now, right? So I want to make sure that we're aligning our economic development activities and not having doubling off or having a one-off somewhere else.
Commissioner, does that give you some closure that we got to that last one? Okay.
It does.
Glad to.
feel tight.
Thank you.
Glad to help.
I do think, commissioners, thank you so much for your work today. We've made tremendous progress. This is a lot farther than I thought we would get, and really appreciate your focus today. And we will look forward to having additional information to you today, and then see you Monday morning.
Thank you. With that, we are recessed until Monday morning at 9. Thank you all.